Mark Benioff came up with the term customer success and had the first CSMs. However, when we started, 1,000 CSMs in the world, people in the role. Fast forward, 10 years later, there's 300,000. By the way, at some point, this is how crazy we were. At some point, we made like a music video trying to win Box. There's a song from the 90s called What If God Was One of Us? You might remember because we made What If Box Was One of Us? Wow. It was so bad. And so I decided to get up on stage, like just coming off pneumonia and literally talking about being lonely as a kid, which I was extremely lonely as a kid. And what that does even to this day of not feeling like people really want me here or not, that started this thing that became like Gainsight is this vulnerable company. So the founder has a chance to not only define the words, but make them real.
I'm Somrat Niyogi, and I'm guest hosting a new series for the Village Global podcast called Recall Sessions. Everyone talks about product, but I want to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention: go-to-market. Specifically, how do the world's most successful companies get their first customers? I'll be sitting down with founders of billion-dollar companies to hear the real story. Not the polished version where everything just clicked, the messy version, the cold emails, the first deals, the selling before the product was even ready. My guest today is Nick Mehta, former CEO of Gainsight. Gainsight is the platform that helps companies drive durable growth through customer-led and product-led strategies. Vista Equity Partners acquired them for $1.1 billion. Nick ran Gainsight as CEO for 13 years before stepping into a board role last year. He didn't just build a company, he built a category. When Gainsight started in 2013, there were just maybe 1,000 customer success managers in the world. Now there are hundreds of thousands. He's co-authored 4 books on the topic, been named Entrepreneur of the Year for Northern California, and currently sits on the boards of F5 and PubMatic. We're going to go back to the early days, before Gainsight became Gainsight. Let's get into it. Nick, I've been wanting to do this since I've met you. You're just an incredible person that has created an incredible company that everyone knows about in the customer success category, which is Gainsight. I appreciate you being here.
It's awesome to be here. And I genuinely mean you're one of the most gracious people I've ever met. So I'm happy to do this.
Thank you so much. So I really, really wanted to spend some time talking about the early days. I mean, everybody knows what Gainsight is today, the brand, the customer success category, but I don't think we've ever really kind of unpacked some of the early days. And I know that you and I met in Mountain View.
Yeah, I remember that.
There was a
Red Rock Coffee.
Red Rock Coffee, right? So for folks that live in Mountain View, we're referring to. Still there, right?
Mountain View's still there, I think. I don't know if Red Rock's there or not.
Let's see. Well, let's assume it's Red Rock there.
We'll assume it's there.
Let's talk about the early days. Tell us about how you got involved in Gainsight. It's probably an interesting story. Maybe you can start there.
Yeah, totally. So I'd run another SaaS company before Gainsight. We sold it. I was doing an entrepreneur in residence at a venture firm, Excel Venture Partners. Entrepreneur in residence, for folks that don't know, is a completely made up job, only in Silicon Valley.
Sounds pretty amazing.
It's completely made up, but you basically hang out with VCs, try to figure out what you want to do next in your life. And one of the problems we had in my last company, which was a SaaS company, was churn, retention, just literally knowing what our customers were doing. And I was shocked that we were sitting in the cloud with our software and we had no idea. And so I was thinking about, I'd written up this sort of rough set of bullet points of what a product might look like. And then random serendipity, a friend of mine who's another venture investor at Battery Ventures called me and said, hey, I just met these 2 founders and they're working on this business, they're working this idea to basically help reduce churn and improve, adoption and renewal and all that in SaaS companies. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I've been thinking about. And so we met up, these 2 guys, Jim Eberlin, Sridhar Pedaneni. They had a very, very early, a mock-up of a product, some early customer interest, but pre-revenue and things like that. And that was in February 2013, which is, for people watching now, that's about 5,000 years ago, probably in AI time. Yeah, exactly.
Was customer success, was that even a role, or tell me about the state of were people who was responsible for churn?
So that's the thing. People knew that, okay, if you have a recurring revenue business, a subscription, today consumption type business, you need to keep your customers. That's kind of like Captain Obvious, right? But who is responsible for that? In older businesses, customers were kind of stuck. So nobody needed to be responsible, right? There's companies like Oracle, SAP in the old kind of the 90s, great companies. They would sell the software and then the salesperson would sell it and then you'd call them if it broke. Otherwise, you're on your own, right? And then, but what happened was when SaaS was pioneered largely by Mark Benioff at Salesforce, this business model changed. where the customer every year could decide, do we want to stay or go? And we'll talk more about this later, but this is so much a bigger deal now with AI, right? Where the like barriers to entry and exit are gone. And so there's no moats. And so Salesforce had to figure this out. And in the early days, they weren't the company they are now. And they needed people to make sure people were adopting the software, they were using it well, and they stayed. Mark Benioff came up with the term customer success and had the first CSMs. However, when we started, there was probably, actually we did we count 1,000 CSMs in the world, people in the role. Which, by the way, like is a terrible TAM to sell into if your software is a few $1,000s a year. I mean, I had like a $2 million TAM. But then, fast forward, 10 years later, there's 300,000, right? Because we knew that eventually everyone would need this type of role. And certainly that's one of the cool things is it actually happened.
When you met with Jim and Sridhar, was there just like love at first sight? Or, I mean, obviously you had interest in the same category and you're feeling it, but like, how was that journey like? It was like founder dating?
Yeah,
and how
that's
was that,
what it was.
How long was that dating process before
it wasn't
you said,
that long, honestly, because I think I was so passionate about the idea, and they're like the most humble people ever. And they're just great humans. And so it was just like, this is a no-brainer. So it was literally maybe a week or two. It was not.
You had slides only. I was like, was that
slides? They built like a mock-up kind of product that was originally on Force.com, which you would remember, Salesforce application development platform. Very different from what Gainsight is today. But there was that. Those are the two things that they had. But there was interest from customers, and we
Did you already have, like, at the time you started going on dates, was there already customers already kind of lined up? They said, we want this, or where was it?
They were like more like, we'd like to try this. Yeah. You know how like any startup is early on, right? Where people are like, we'll try this. And, of course they were like the investor portfolio companies and all that, right? So that was that level, which is where you start. And for the first few months, that's kind of all we did was sell to our friends and sell to our investors' friends. And
did people just like pick it up and say, I like, maybe you can talk about what the first version of the product was? And what was the thing that sort of drew people to be like, hey, I'm willing to give it a try?
Well, I think the interesting thing, because it's so tied to category creation, is I'll talk about the product in a second, but the first version was really more about the community and the people. So what happened was in February 2013, we got started. In March 2013, we had this office in Mountain View, California, the one you're right across the street from Red Road. I was on the second floor. It was above a bar, if you remember. There's that bar in the corner, right? The carpet's peeling off the floor. The bathrooms are kind of gross. It was like not a nice office. But we're like, hey, there's this new role that's starting to emerge, customer success manager. It's at Salesforce. It's a few other companies. We're like, what if we threw like a meetup to see if people want to like meet each other? Forget about us, right? Because eventually we want to sell them software. And so we organized this meetup. We're in California, so we went to Safeway, which is a local grocery store. I got like the cheapest wine, the cheapest like that cheese tray that really shouldn't stay out more than a couple hours.
Yeah, we all had that.
We've always had that. Put it on this on a ping pong table, because we didn't have conference room. We just had like a ping pong table, and we put them on there, and then we send a invite up. Right? We all thought we'd get 30 people. There was like 75 people in the office till like 10 p.m.
Wow.
And they weren't there because of us. They were there because of them, because of each other. Right. And we were like, God, this is a community that is like a new role, trying to figure out like, what's my job? We've all been in situations where you're like, whether it's personal or work, like you're trying to find people like you, right? That's what community is. Find people like you, right? So I'm less alone. Know that I'm on the right path. And these people came to this like crappy little meetup, not for the wine or cheese, for each other. And so we figured out, gosh, like the opportunity here is to be the company that builds the CS community, defines the role, helps figure out the best practices, and then builds the software, right? And the software just is a manifestation of what we learned from the community. And so we can talk a lot more about it. That turned into our big conference, which started with 300 people in 2013, and eventually it was like 6,000 people in Moscone right before COVID. And then all of that fed into our product and what we built, which we could talk more about.
And so tell me about what was the community, obviously lots of things to work on. What was the community kind of like screaming about that they needed the most in the early days when you were just getting started?
Yeah. So
were they asking for something, or were you just kind of throwing different things and saying?
The latter. So that's a tricky thing, I think, for people that are like building stuff where it's not like a well-defined need. I think AI is all this now. It's like, okay, people know they need something. They don't know what they need. So it's not like you go ask them what they need because they don't know, right? Like OpenAI and Anthropic don't go and ask customers, what do you need from AGI, right? Like nobody knows. And so the same way, you can do some customer discovery, but you also have to give stuff for them to react to. So you need to know the pain points. For example, a pain point would be, I have a lot of customers. I don't have enough people. Which customers should I focus on right now, right? But the way that works, and should it be workflow? Should it be automated? All of that came from companies like Gainsight. There were a few competitors of ours who also were smart. So, we were the ones saying you should do X, Y, and Z. And this is one of the things we'll talk more about category creation. What's crazy is years later, people will be defining their best practices and how they do CS, and they'll be using the terminology from our product and not even be using the product because it became part of the water, right? Similar to, you were at Salesforce and like the idea of an opportunity record, a contact record, an account, a forecast, companies like Salesforce and Siebel invented those. And literally some people use them without even knowing that. And that's when you have success.
Building on force.com.
Yeah.
Tell me about, was that the right choice at the time? I know, and obviously I was there when sort of Force was kind of getting started. A lot of folks are kind of developing products like, do I build it on another platform?
Right.
Do I go control myself? You decided to do it on Force. Tell me about that choice. And when reflecting back on it, well, how would you approach it the same way that you did at the original state?
Yeah, of course, in life, we never know the counterfactual, what would happen, right? But what I'll tell you is, I've thought about that question a lot. What it allowed us to do is kind of get started with larger customers. So large customers and mid-sized customers don't trust startups in general. What they do trust is their underlying platform technology. And if there's a plug into that platform, it's easier to get them. So our first customers, first 20 or 30 included, Workday, DocuSign, Okta.
Those are huge customers.
Yeah, within tech, those are big companies, right? And then later on, like that, basically Gainsight's revenue comes from tons of large customers, tons of multi-million, some tens of millions of dollars, right? And it all went back to that Force.com decision. So Workday literally was customer number 3, 4, 5. There's no way we get Workday. That's a company has a lot of confidential information given what they do. So they're very sensitive. The only reason we got it, they've told us, is because we're on Force. And then for folks that don't know, we later, 4 or 5 years later, built our own platform, 100% native, with just a connector to Salesforce, not on the Salesforce platform, much more decoupled. We had to move all the customers at the time. The benefit of moving the customers was multifold. They would be on our modern product. We also wouldn't have to pay the big royalty because you pay a royalty usually to these platform companies. That was a gigantic and complex project. In fact, when we were built on Force, our chief product officer, he had a friend who knew Salesforce stuff well. And he's like, you will never be able to leave Force.com. And I guess we took it as a challenge.
Right.
And we were able to do it. But not everyone's able to get off the platform. So I would say if you can feel like you can bootstrap off the platform and then move off of it, that's the best of all worlds. But it's a high wire act for sure.
A lot of founders are listening and kind of wondering about, like, were you just selling to all your friends? What if you don't have friends that are like, did you have friends that were running customer success teams? And
Nope.
You just say there's not that many teams to begin with.
Yeah, I actually honestly am super lucky to have a great network of CEOs and people to sell to now. But back then, no, we didn't have them. What we did was really primarily sell to our investors portcos. Just being totally honest. And this happens, hopefully all of you are leveraging your investors very well. It's one of their value props, getting the intros and things like that. So yeah, most of our early customers were that. But the other way we got customers was community, these events that we did where we would bring people together, not about a product.
And it was really not about a fancy event. When I think of event, most founders are thinking, oh, I got to go do a fancy dinner or something like that.
We eventually did the big conference pulse and things like that. But so much of it was these small things that cost nothing, like $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, very, very cost-effective ways to market. And so, yeah, it was getting people together, and then it's having the long perspective. Like, I think it's one thing I would say I'd encourage people to think about. I sometimes see a little bit of the transactional nature. I get it. When you're a founder, you need something right now, right? But the more you push a customer that's not ready, the more you burn the chance to work with them when they are ready, right? And, we've all seen that even in personal lives, right? Some like annoying telemarketer or something calls you, right? And so I think some stuff that helped us was just like being extremely patient. Some sales cycle took like 2 years, right? And I mean, Box was one of those kind of legendary because they were like, they're a very high profile SaaS company then and even to this day, right? And, I mean, they were like for a year and a half, they weren't ready for anything because they built some internal tooling. And then they're like, we want to look at some different solutions, including Gainsight. And then I think we heard at some point one of our competitors was ahead in the eval or something. And so then I literally just started going there, like sitting in their lobby, like I don't know. I'm so glad that security didn't escort me out. Literally, I knew the Wi-Fi password. I knew the front desk receptionist. She was into Disney movies. Like I'm literally to this day. We made, by the way, at some point, this is how crazy we were. At some point, we made like a music video trying to win Box. There's a song from the 90s called What If God Was One of Us? You might remember because you're mine. We made What If Box Was One of Us?
Wow.
It was so bad. But the patience, the persistence, don't make it transactional.
Was there budget for this stuff? Like, how did you go? A lot of folks are selling something that there is no budget for.
No budget. Yeah.
And so how did you go make those early cases? Was it an ROI narrative or was it a like, hey, I'll just scrap and figure out something? Like, how'd you go about that?
So usually what happens is like, when you're selling it to growing companies, which is a little different than selling mature companies. Growing companies every year, the department budgets are growing somewhat, right? And so the, executive, so in our case, let's say customer success leader, they have a budget and they have extra people they need to hire next year. I was just meeting with somebody in OpenAI and she's like, she's got to hire. I mean, it's an extreme example. She's like, she's got approved 100 headcount for next year, right? And so one of the things you're competing.
It's strictly headcount budget because they didn't have like a line
There's
item
no software
for like
budget,
software budget. Or anything
but
like
what you're competing with is essentially the executive saying, do I want to hire more people or can I use your software? And so one of the things you can do if it's a growing company is convince the executive this is self-funding, meaning if you buy this, you'll need one less headcount or two less headcount or whatever. Right? So that's a pretty simple ROI case. But I think people don't just buy for ROI. They also buy because they believe. And so the other thing we would do is just trying to understand what are the pressure points. So for example, I remember one customer where we'd been talking to them forever. And then they called us. They're like, we need to buy now. And I'm like, why? They're like, we just lost a huge customer and our CEO's pissed. Right. Another one was like, hey, we need to do this now because we're about to launch a new product. We want to do, customer success right from the beginning. And so a key thing is businesses don't buy software purely intellectually and rationally. They often buy it based on an event or a problem or an issue or things like that. And so a very important thing is to be there when they're in that moment. That's why, great salespeople are so important because you want to be there in that moment when the customer's like, oh my God, I cannot take this anymore. I need to do something different.
Right now, everybody talks about founder-led sales.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, how long were you doing it yourself before you said, I feel like I understand what I'm trying to do. I understand how we're supposed to sell. Let me go hire folks. Did you hire salespeople right away or how did you go about it?
We hired salespeople pretty early in those early days. And there were some good people there. But frankly, I think most of them weren't able to be successful because it really was us selling. And it's funny because if you ask Gainsight employees, be like, how long was Nick involved in sales? They'd be like, what was his last day?
Right.
Literally that. I think I was doing sales calls on my last day, that level, right? Wow. I stepped down from Gainsight last year. And so I love it. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's amazing.
A lot of founders are kind of scared about, if you've never done sales, you've never you never carried a quota, never gone through a sales process yourself. Yep. For folks that are listening that are kind of building an enterprise software company that are product and technical in nature, they actually have an ROI case around the headcount versus sort of hey, you don't need to hire another person. What advice would you give to them about, the journey of being a founder that is selling a software into a market that does not exist? I
think sales is an interesting profession because people think it's one thing, but the truth is there's a million different ways to sell, right? We all know this. I mean, there's a million different types of salespeople. They can be successful. At Gainsight, one of our most successful salespeople ever, arguably the GOAT, or at least one of the top 2 or 3, this guy named Adam Wicks. Adam Wicks is in the UK. He did famously our biggest land deal ever at SAP for $6 million a year, and then he beat his quota every single year the entire time I was running the company. It's truly amazing. And everybody's
going to ping Adam now, by the way.
You should.
Adam, you're probably going to get a message.
And he actually, if you Google, he did a podcast on some sales podcast, which I listened to. And, his thing is he is just immensely curious, and curious both about the business of the customer, but more importantly, the humans at the customer. And this is something people often miss, is humans buy software for their human needs, and then they justify it to their business, right? So what are human needs at work? Well, I want to get promoted. I don't want to get fired. I'm worried about my job. I'm worried about my team. And so, Adam would do a great job of really understanding what made each person in these large companies tick. What were they worried about? This is kind of what people would sometimes call the politics, but that's a negative word. It's just humans being humans. And I think that part of sales is just like part of building a product, which is being really curious and learning and studying, and just asking lots of questions. But the most important thing, it's not just about you. So for example, we do a little role play, right? If I jump on a call, the bad sales call is, hey, I'm Nick from so-and-so company, company. And I'd love to learn about, what your goals are for our technology right now. And you're like, as a customer, you're like, dude, I have so many other things going on besides your technology, right? Or I'd love to just understand your goals in general. You're like, why am I telling you your goals? Versus, hey, I've seen a lot of people that are VPs of whatever struggling in our customer base, struggling with these issues around AI. And, that we've actually brought a community together. And, I just want to know if there's ways we can help. We make introductions, help connect you to other people. I am trying to help. I'm showing I have credibility. I'm showing empathy. I'm trying to help you right away before I've tried to sell you any software. Right. And that's the thing that I think a mistake people make is they immediately jump into, let me tell you about my product.
First of all, that's great advice. I really think that before any product or anything, there's a human, and we got to set them up for success.
Absolutely.
And we happen to have technology that's going to enable them to do so. One of the things that's been interesting about the Gainsight journey is that now everybody talks about it. It's a category that sort of has been sort of fairly well defined. I mean, it's kind of going through its own renaissance right now. I remember this notion of it sort of building the community, and then everybody saying, I need to buy customer success software. And everybody talks about, hey, I want to get on a Gartner, I want to create a quadrant, and then everybody wants to be in the quadrant, and they want to be in the top right. Tell me about how you thought about that. Was that a goal that you had in mind, or was that because I feel like some founders they say, "Hey, are you part of an existing category?"
Yeah.
Or and most folks will say, "I'll try to create a new category."
Yeah.
So tell me about your thought process there and how you approached it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because because of this, Gainsight's reasonably well known for quote unquote creating a category. I get us all the time by founders, how do I create a category? And the first thing I say is, are you sure you really want to?
Right.
Literally, I always joke I'm actually 25 years old, but this is just what category creation does to you.
Right.
It ages you. And, so I basically would say first figure out, do you want to do it? Do you need to do it? Not want to. Do you need to? It's better to say, look, there's an existing category and I'm just going to redefine it. Or I'm going to have a better version of the product. I remember one of the first investors in Snowflake told me about the company before everyone knew what it was. And he's like, yeah, it's this company. It's like data warehousing and it's next generation. I'm like, data warehousing, that's such a boring old category. Turns out that's a pretty good category. Right? Sure. Like a pretty darn good category. You don't need to create a new one, Now there's a different version, which is I'm merging categories. You could argue this is what Databricks is doing, right? Because they're taking so many different categories, data lake, data warehouse, database, et cetera, merging them all together. This is what, Palo Alto Networks has done in cybersecurity. And that's a very good strategy because then there's still established buyers. I think that the reason why you create a new category is if there's just no way to redefine or merge existing categories. So from my perspective, it's like in case of emergency, break glass, you do it at the end. Last resort is to create a new category. But if you're going to create one, then you have to put in that heavy work. You have to have the vision of one day there'll be a magic quadrant. In fact, that was, in the beginning of Gainsight, our CMO, Anthony, and I, who are still super close, we were like, one day Gartner's going to have a magic quadrant, 3, 4, 5 years from now. It took 10 years, literally, for the magic quadrant. Just shows you how hard this stuff is, right? But it eventually happened. And it took a lot of kind of heavy lifting and work to actually get there.
And what is that when you not to trivialize and put into hey, you just do these 3 things, but I'm going to ask you anyways, if you had to do 3 things to create a category, what would those 3 things be?
Create an awesome community where people feel like the belonging around their careers is bigger than just the vendor. So that one for us is our Pulse community, our conferences, our events.
And you put that as number one.
I mean, literally, if that didn't happen, Gainsight doesn't exist. Absolutely no way whatsoever. You creating that community so that it connects everyone together and there's a sense of identity. Gainsight customers all say, like, when you ask, why'd you buy from Gainsight? They're like, number one, the community. Number one, most important thing is community. And by the way, they have great software too, right? It's always that. Number two is become the authority on how to do the job. And so because we have the community, we were able to write, literally 5 books on, I helped write, I think 3 or 4 of them on customer success and create all the best practices and playbooks. There should be no question who you go to. And then number 3, again, within this world of like, okay, I have to create a category. I think the culture matters so much, and we can talk more about it. But your culture internally emanates in your community and your customers. So much so, as an example, our kind of mission, purpose statement at Gainsight was to be living proof you can win in business while being human first. That idea of human first was a big part of what we do. We would talk to our customers about it in the community events. You could go on LinkedIn right now and you'd find thousands of people with customer success profession who put human first in their LinkedIn description. So those 3 things of the kind of the community, being the expert, all the content around that, and then the culture, those are the 3.
When we talk about number 2, did you, some folks says, listen to your customers and like, how much were you kind of leading the way versus sort of like saying, this is the problem that they have and we're going to solve this? I mean, like, how did you approach that? Is it the Steve Jobs kind of like, you don't know what you need, so I'm going to go build for it? Like, how did you guys approach that?
Listen to the expert customers. So talk to all the customers, figure out the ones that are really cutting edge, and then listen to them.
What does cutting edge mean in that context?
It means it's a little bit domain specific. It could be in the biggest scale. It could be in just the smartest people. You know when you see it. When you meet a customer, you're like, oh my God, they're so smart. Frankly, like some of those customers, by the way, won't buy your software right away because they built their own tools. So if I were a founder, one of the things I would do is I would actually meet everyone. I would spend a lot of time with the people who won't buy your stuff. And I would just go be like, let me just learn from you.
Did you have a customer advisory board fairly early, or like when did you formalize
we had a customer advisory board pretty early, but I think most of the learning, the whole way. But I think most of the learning came one-on-one. So, because you go deep. I think the advisory board's good it's actually frankly good to build your business because like they're all in this thing and then you get a new, sometimes we'd have like a new potential customer and to get them to sign that quarter, we'd say you can join the advisory board and things like that. I think it's very good stuff to do. But I think it really came down to like, you meet this customer and you're like, wow. And by the way, like I'll give you an example. So in that same era of Mountain View, Red Rock Coffee, a company we were trying to get is a company called Aptio. Not a huge company. It's probably today about 600 million revenue. And Dion Hedgepeth was a CCO then. And I don't know how I got connected to her, through some friend of a friend. And we show her a demo and she's like, that's pretty good. Let me show you what we have. And so she showed me like something, health scoring is like a big thing in customer success. Like how do you measure like, likelihood to renew and all that. She showed me hers. It was way better than ours. Literally like way better. And I was like, oh my God, this is how you should do it. And so, of course, we built the product like that. And then that became the best practice. And by the way, that became the best practice to this day. We should have like Dion's face.
Do you ever have tension though internally of like, oh, that customer doesn't know they're doing that's a rogue thing. That's a one-off. That's not the way everyone else does. Well, that's where you
as the founder just have to have that sense, right? You totally. Like I had lots of people who would overcomplicate things. In fact, I think we got some things short-term right and long-term wrong because people would over-engineer.
What's an example of that?
The workflow part of customer success became too robotic.
Tell me about
So Gainsight. So one of the things Gainsight can do is based on all these signals, like how people use your product, when your renewal is, what their NPS score is. We have this very powerful rules engine to drive action for a CSM to reach out to customer. Now that sounds really good. It's very widely used, by the way. But a leader can almost overdo that. This is just like in Salesforce. A leader can overdo this where they're like, okay, if this happens, I want somebody to do this. And I want them to follow up. And I want them to do these 14 steps. We call that a playbook that you're going to go follow up. And I want to know when step 3 hasn't been completed within this many days. And the users freaking would hate that. They blame Gainsight. Really what they're blaming is this idea of being micromanaged. And so that's an example.
I'm just like accomplishing, completing
totally.
tasks.
And then by comparison, worse if you do the opposite. One of the best product decisions we made early on was actually Carl Rumhart, our chief product officer early on. It was amazing. We had this kind of like human side of Gainsight where it's like directing people what to do. And then he's like, we need a digital side that would be more automated, like virtual. Today you'd call it agentic, but it wasn't AI based at that time. And so he's like, we need to take like the marketing automation engine concept, like a HubSpot or Marketo, and build it into Gainsight. And honestly, a lot of people internally were like, why do you need to do that? Those tools exist already, right? And customers weren't really asking for them, but he kind of pushed it through and it was like a phenomenal decision, you know? That's like it's called Journey Orchestrator. So one of the most widely used parts of the product, you know, like by far. And so that's an example of not listening to anyone else, but just having that product sense.
One of the things that happened, I don't know which year it was, but you probably know exactly the year when Salesforce kind of came, there was a Dreamforce.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then it was like, we are the customer success platform.
Totally.
And like, that's got to be a scary place where you're like doing all this work, you're raising the category, and then this big monolithic company comes and says, no, that's not what, we are the customer success platform.
Yes.
Walk me through what was going on in your head at that time. How did you approach it? Did you do anything different? And you're like, you know what, whatever, big companies. Was that a good thing?
Yeah. It's funny. Yes, I remember that very well. And I don't remember if it was like 2017, 2018 in that time frame. So we started in 2013, to give you a rough idea. So we weren't that big of a company, but we had something to lose. And I remember it was literally the headline of Dreamforce. It was on the website. It was billboards. And then, of course, everyone texts me and says, hey, do you see this Salesforce thing? Are they competing with you guys? Are they using your stuff? We have no idea. We were like technically partners of theirs, but like there's a billion partners, right? And so we had no idea. And then it got worse because we went to Dreamforce and then we met this like very nice person who actually later on became a customer in another company. And he's like, he's at Salesforce and he wants to like really learn more about Gainsight so we can partner more closely together. So I was like, okay, sure. Naively, I was like, okay, sure. Let me show you the whole product. So we're demoing it. And then, and he's like, do you mind if I take some notes and some screenshots? I don't know why I'm so naive. And then literally like the next year, the same dude's at Dreamforce with the presentation about the customer success platform they built internally, and the screens look exactly the same as Gainsight.
Oh my God.
Right? But whatever, all's fair in like love and war, right? And so I was like very concerned. Half of me was like, it's a big company. They're not going to be able to execute. Our market's not that big for Salesforce. We'll be fine. But part of me is like, oh my God, I'm getting hammered all the time by people asking me questions on this. What do I say? You know? Now, we did the normal thing. We said, well, we're really focused on it. Here's the things they can't do, et cetera. I think it did create a short-term drag though, because customers then are like, ooh, let me just wait to see what Salesforce does, you know? And so that's something I think it's important for everyone listening to know is every time the platform company announces something, the customer says, ooh, let's take a step back from looking at this point solution. I want to see if I can do this in Anthropic or OpenAI or in modern terms, right? And so, it did create a short-term drag. Long-term though, the truth is they went on to their next message 2 years later, right?
Right.
And so, and you work there. So, the message has changed. Like it's any big company, it changes. But short-term, yeah, it freaked us out.
For founders that, are in a market where the big monolith kind of like comes and sort of enters enters the space. What advice would you give to those founders that are living in that moment right now? I mean, you're seeing the big, research labs, not pay attention to something and all of a sudden pay attention to something, and it's happening all the time. You're seeing the bigger companies trying to find new products and new markets they can enter. There are a lot of founders that this is kind of happening to.
Yeah.
What would you say to those founders?
I think one thing, tied to the Salesforce example, I forgot to mention, I think a key variable is there like a GM or senior person in the platform company who would wake up and think this is really important for them to solve? If there is, you got a problem. At Salesforce, we got lucky. They have something called Sales Cloud, which is like their sales CRM, you know all about it. And then something else called Service Cloud, which is more like support. And kind of Gainsight sits in between those two in the seam. And so I think one thing you might think about if you're a founder of an AI company is like, is there some senior person at OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever that their whole job is this category? In which case, I would think you need to evolve a lot. By contrast, is it like diffuse and it's like a little bit of each person's job? I wouldn't worry at all.
Okay. One of the things that So first of all, so we're gonna fast forward.
Yeah.
I know we have a few minutes left here. But, one of the things that I have admired, and I think millions of people have admired that have been enterprise software, is the culture you've created at Gainsight. You have the videos you've created, obviously Pulse, the conference, how you show up in the world. I remember you and I had this conversation a long time ago about, you want to create an amazing place to work, which it continues to be in this day, and some of the leaders that you've passed the torch to. What does culture mean to you, and how did you approach that in the early days? And some folks think of it as like, oh, hey, culture is A, B, and C, and this is how we're going to define ourselves. But you've lived a certain way, and you continue to live in a certain way, and it's kind of how you lead. Tell me about culture.
Yeah, I mean, it was so important to us, and I think that's the heart of it, which is, why is it important? So I think one question, if I were a founder, is be like, why is this figuring out culture important to me? And that then lets you define a more high integrity what in terms of the words and values and all that. So what's the why, right? So for me, it was like, I actually really want to work in a place where people treat each other as human beings. And that's what turned into our whole thing. And that's just like my whole ethos of my whole life. Like, you'd almost want to like have somebody interview the people outside of you, the founder outside of work about you, and be like, what does this person really care about, right? If they at work, if they say their values at work are like kindness and respect, and outside of work, they're like, their friends are like, kindness and respect, what are you talking about? That's not what this guy cares about at all, or gal cares about at all. And so to me, it's really important that it's something that's deep in your why. Like, why'd you start this company? Mm-hmm. And I think one of the problems people make is they try to find a culture that fits everyone. Mm-hmm. It's not specific enough because it doesn't have a why. So to me, it's like, what's your why personally? Like, why did you start this company? Why does culture matter, right? Who are some of the people you've hired early on that embody that why? And what's unique about them? And then what words for the values and all that, what words are so quirky and unusual that would only describe your company? You want values that like literally people be like, see the list, they'd be like, oh my God, that's definitely that company. Because nobody would come up with stuff like that. That's definitely that person. They'd say that founder.
And did you do that was this like you and the founders kind of sitting in a room and kind of like sitting in a room and talking about it?
Yeah.
Or like how like for folks that are, building companies, they have a small team and they know this is important. Like, what was the actual execution of that?
So first of all, I would wait until you probably have 15, 20 employees to try to put it into words. Maybe in the beginning, you try to like write down your whys. Like, that's great to capture them. But in terms of like values and all that, once you've hired enough people, and probably in the first 20, you've hired some mishires. Mm-hmm. And then like this person, they fit so well, and this one didn't. And like, what are the things that are different? And so what we did specifically was when we were in that like 20, 30 people, we did like a meeting offsite, whatever, got in a room, flip charts. Everyone like wrote down like what words represent our culture, what ones don't represent our culture. And then ultimately the founder's got to be the person that's the editor, the writer. So like I made all the decisions on it unapologetically, right? And then you now have something that's the beginning. But then at that point, you just have a kernel. Mm-hmm. Then you got to go make it real, right? And so then you find those high profile moments. Maybe a good closing one is, we had many moments over the years that cement our culture. But I think one of the ones that really started something very significant around this human first idea is Pulse, our conference every year, Pulse 2017. It was in Oakland, California. It was a very notable Pulse. It was a 1990s themed Pulse. It was super fun. We actually had Vanilla Ice as a surprise performer, surprisingly affordable, by the way. We had a party on an aircraft carrier. It was amazing. I got pneumonia a week beforehand, or 2 weeks beforehand. I got better, it was cleared, but like no energy. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I need to go do this speech. And I would do the speech every year, and it was all high energy. Mm-hmm. But I was like, I want to do it a little differently. I want to close with the moment of like on human vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to get up on stage, like just coming off pneumonia, and literally talk about being lonely as a kid, which I was extremely lonely as a kid. And what that does, even to this day, of not feeling like people really want me here or not, to like 2,000 people that I couldn't see because of the lights on stage. Right. And then that started this thing that became like Gainsight is this vulnerable company. And everyone at Gainsight, where they speak, when they meet customers, when they meet each other in Japan, in India, it all is that. So the founder has a chance to not only define the words, but make them real.
I have to ask this one last question. Fast forward to to today. You had a successful exit to Vista. People have this very negative kind of perception of, oh, you're gonna get acquired by PE, and you made it happen, and then you stuck it out for some time there. What is, for folks that are kind of have a negative perception of PE, what do you have to say to those folks? What did you learn at your time there before moving on to your next thing?
I'll give you one learning. It's a simple one. I think every kind of part of business is about understanding the incentives and goals of both parties. Whether you're working with a customer, an employee, a VC, private equity, it's just really understanding what they're going for. And so private equity, they raise money from investors who expect that money to be returned with less upside than VC, but in a more consistent and faster way. Mm-hmm. The way they do that is by taking companies that make less money and have them make more money, and ideally going faster, but at a minimum making more money. And they do that also by having debt, which allows them to have higher returns. These are just facts of how it works. Mm-hmm. It's gravity. And so when founders get acquired by a private equity firm and there's a discussion of cutting headcount or cutting costs, and they're like shocked, I'm like, did you just not do any research whatsoever? Mm-hmm. That's literally how they operate. And so to me, it's just always understanding incentives. And as long as you do that, then you go in with like the same, goals. And then you're like, look, either first of all, maybe I'm not into that anymore. You leave the company, or maybe you have a different opinion on how you do it, which is fine. That's totally fine. I think when people kind of think of them as some like they're just evil and dumb, it's like, no, you would do the same thing if you were in their shoes, because they have a different kind of shoes than you do. Their shoes are very nice, but they're different kinds of shoes.
Well, hey, when you and I chatted about doing this, I think you and I had like 15 other topics to talk about. So I feel like we're going to have to do this again. I'm really grateful for all of the advice that you have for the listeners today, and just being a friend to me and friend to every customer success leader that's in a profession today, largely due to you. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much, man. This has been so fun. I really enjoyed it.
All right. We're going to do this again another time.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, bud.
Hey, this is Ben Kesnoka, co-founder of Village Global. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Village Global podcast, where we go deep on all of the biggest topics in tech. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can check us out on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to see you for the next one.